In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbartis, Nathan Lutz, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies, and knights to the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Russell Guest, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Mr. Chad Robinson. How are you doing today, sir?
It's spooky season. I am pumped.
By the way, Chad normally says he's pumped and it doesn't sound pumped. You actually sound pumped today. And joining us today, I'm also pumped. We have returned for the second time on the show, Ms. Lindsay Washburn from the great state of Iowa. How you doing, Lindsay?
I'm good. I'm really excited you guys asked me to come back because I had so much fun. We talked about Jaws, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That was a really fun episode. Talking about my favorite movie of all time. You can't beat that, so...
It was a very good episode, and I also love Jaws. It's way up there for me, too.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a little bit, even though it's summertime beach, I still think it's scary enough that you can enjoy it in October, too. Completely reasonable.
Oh, yeah. It's always a good time for Jaws.
Yeah. Christmas time?
Sure.
Oh, yes. Yeah. There's a movie called Santa Jaws, so it is out there.
I think the Jaws the Revenge, it opens around Christmas time.
Oh, okay.
The opening scenes are during Christmas, so unofficial Christmas movie, I guess. Christmas horror movie.
Yeah, hot take Jaws 3D is worse than Jaws the Revenge.
Oh, I love Jaws 3D just because it's the whole SeaWorld thing, and Leah Thompson is in it, and Dennis Quaid, it's just so crazy.
It is. So, for those who don't know, Lindsay is coming into us. She has a YouTube channel. Is that right, Lindsay?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. On YouTube, it's just my name, Lindsay Washburn, and it's Lindsay with an A, not with an E. A lot of people like to spell it with an E, but it's with an A. And I do movie reviews, and I talk about my VHS collection and all sorts of stuff movie related.
Well, that is the reason you are here, but also, you've also taken your efforts over to the Bad Movie Night podcast. Is this true?
Yes, the guys over at Bad Movie Night asked me to become a permanent member just a couple years ago, and we watch a lot of bad movies, and then we talk about them and play fun games, and if you're a patron, you get to recommend movies to us to watch, and we choose a patron-recommended film every other week.
So you can either listen to bad hosts talk about good movies on Retro Movie Roundtable, or you can listen to good hosts talk about bad movies on Lindsay's
There you go.
The Bad Movie Night
There you
podcast. So they're companion pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and it all averages out to total mediocrity together. So there we go.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That's what I shoot for.
Yes. Lindsay, now you talk a lot about your VHS collection. You just mentioned it here. What part makes you love the VHS players and tapes so much that you're still enjoying them today?
Well, I mean, anyone who says it has nothing to do with nostalgia is lying, I think, a little bit. But there's still a ton of films that you cannot find anywhere but on VHS, especially certain cuts, things like that. And I'm also a very tactile person. I like having the tape in my hand and looking at the box cover art. I think like DVD and Blu-ray cover art, at least for major releases, is not what it used to be. You get all these lovely, especially with horror, these lovely hand-drawn illustrated covers for horror, and they're very interesting. And I actually talk about this a lot in the documentary The Cult of VHS, which is coming soon to a streaming platform near you.
This is exciting. So is there a particular movie cover that you have an affinity for, Lindsay?
Oh man, the original Evil Dead.
Oh, yeah.
She has a wall of VHS
Yes.
behind her, which I know we're all audio, so, but nevertheless, it's an impressive backdrop. My favorite part is you could fast forward through the FBI warning faster than you can now when they just say, no, I won't let you skip through them anymore.
Right.
So,
Yeah, Sony and their unskippable trailers. Yep.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of times, especially with things like full moon pictures, stuff like that, there's little making of little vignettes at the end after the credits, or little commercials where you can buy merchandise. Well, not anymore, but you could at the time when the VHS came out. So there's all these little things that are really cool about VHS. If you have an old rental tape, there's really cool stickers. It's kind of a nerdy hobby, but I enjoy it.
I like to think that the phone number at the end of that to buy merchandise from like ET or something like that it's been reassigned to somebody else, and I like to think that somebody is sitting there going like, I'd like to buy the ET doll, please. and the person's like, stop calling
for the last time.
My name's Brian. I'm a normal dude. Stop calling here.
It's like how NORAD became the Santa tracking because everyone was trying to call the North Pole and wound up calling NORAD.
Oh my God.
So Lindsay, what was the last movie you saw?
The last movie I saw in the theater was Barbarian, which I absolutely loved. I think we're starting to see this renaissance of just crazy horror films, like last year with Malignant. Pearl is coming out this weekend, and they just announced the third movie in the X trilogy, Maxine, so I'm very excited for that. So it's a good time for crazy horror movies right now.
Yeah. Now, Chad, I'm guessing your last movie was also a horror movie?
It was the same one. Weirdly for me, I didn't go into either of the two movies knowing what I was getting, but my last two 2022 movies both had Justin Long in them. So I saw House of Darkness, which is Justin and his real-life wife. It's kind of like a stage play. It's fun. And then there's Barbarian, which Lindsay kind of nailed. I really, really enjoyed it. I want to make a comparison to another somewhat modern movie, but it would ruin the movie. So
it's like this movie. I've tried so hard not to spoil it for anybody, and just tell people just go see it. Don't watch the trailer, which doesn't really give that much away, anyways. But I'm just like, just go see the movie. Just go see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the best recommendation you can do. So that's the just see it. I don't need to tell you why. Just see it. That's the best recommendation.
Just see it.
Yeah. My last movie was Mulan, so it's the opposite of what you guys just saw.
Just a little different.
Yeah, the 98 version with Eddie Murphy. So.
Okay. All right. Did it make a man out of you?
I think so. Yeah. So today we're going to cover what movie, Chad?
Speaking of terrifying VHS covers, the one that haunted me from my childhood, Hellraiser from 1987.
That's right. Hellraiser is made for $1 million in the year of 1987. It grosses domestically $14.5 million, so it's actually quite successful given its investment. It comes in at the box office at 77, just behind Batteries Not Included and above Ishtar. And the number one movie that year is Beverly Hills Cop 2. IMDb gives Hellraiser not that high, a 6.9% rating. Critics of Rotten Tomatoes are pretty close at 71%. Audience score pretty close as well at 72%. Not the highest of ratings, but also not terrible either. Lindsay, this obviously isn't your first time with Hellraiser. What was your first time with Hellraiser, and what was it like coming back to it today?
Truth be told, Hellraiser is one of my more favorite horror movies, especially when it comes to body horror. The first time I saw this was probably back in the early 90s. And rented it on VHS, sleepover, and we watched it, and I couldn't get over the shock of what I was seeing with all this body horror stuff going on, and flesh ripping, and, BDSM demons all over the place, and a guy with pins coming out of his head. And I've watched it over 100 times since then, and I love going back to it, especially as I got older, because it wasn't so much about that shock value for me, but some of the other things going on within the story that really made it one of my more favorite horror movies.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's holding up for you over the years? Like, when something has initial shock value, I find it doesn't age as well. Is there more for you than that initial shock?
I mean, I think it's still a very gross body horror movie. The practical effects in this are really, really good, especially for the budget that they had. And they're very, very wet and gross looking, and the sound design that goes along with it. So, I mean, a few things still get me a little bit, but for me, that's faded quite a bit since my initial viewing.
Okay, so it's changing over time. How about you, Chad?
Oh, yeah.
Is this your first time with Hellraiser?
No, certainly not. And I told Russell I went through the entire Hellraiser series before this podcast, which It was one of those Anchorman scenarios of, I regret this decision immediately. Like, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the series, there are 10 of these. There's about to be 11. Basically, 5 through 10 were different movies that Cenobites get thrown into randomly when the scripts don't hold up. Some to mixed results. But yeah, this took me a while to get to, because like I said, I remember this VHS cover. We passed it at the grocery store. Grocery stores used to have a video rental section, and that's where I distinctly remember it and just kind of avoiding it. And I probably didn't get to this movie until college. So I was in my 20s when I saw it. And I liked it. I liked the design. It's something the $1 million budget clearly shows through. Like, I wish that Clive Barker had more experience when he made this movie. I wish that he had more money. This is probably the highest potential franchise that's just kind of struggled to realize that potential. It's got so many cool things going for it, though.
Yeah, and my story is very similar to yours, Chad. I remember seeing this in the VHS rental store, and the cover, as you just walk around the store, the cover sticks out of the horror section by far as being, to me, one of the most striking of, like, and then my head's like, that looks like the scariest movie ever. Like, ever
Right.
made.
It's called Hellraiser. So.
Yeah. And, like, I remember even, like, getting out of the car, walking out and sitting into the passenger seat, which you were allowed to do at that age. I was small. And, like, I was still sitting in the passenger seat of the car, looking through the window of the rental store and still seeing Pinhead's face look at me through the glass because it was on the first shelf. And I was like, ah.
Oh, my gosh.
Stop looking at me, Pinhead. So yeah, I'm with you, Chad. I was a little bit frightened to approach it. I didn't get into horror movies until later in college, and I didn't pick this one up until I got out of college. So it took me a while to brave up, and I'll be honest with you, I was really surprised. I liked this movie, and it was not just gore fest. In fact, I don't tend to like gore-driven movies where, like, the gore is the reason we're all here and why we've gathered today. To me, it's got more going for it. There's more character development than I would have expected. And I'm with Chad. There's moments in this where you're sitting there going like, oh, there's something really good here, and they couldn't afford maybe better actors, or some of the effects weren't brought to full fruition. To me, it's one of those, this is almost great, but then it was held back by limitations at the time.
Oh, definitely.
But we're going to get into it today, and we're going to spoil this movie. And I will say, I do think it holds up, by the way. I think it holds up remarkably well. The effects still look amazing, and that to me is just really impressive that they had so little money and it still looks as good as it does to me. So we will spoil this movie, and we will be back after these messages.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason, and this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments, too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
We're back, and there will be spoilers that lie ahead. So, Chad, without further ado, will you give us a refresher for those who haven't seen Hellraiser since 1987?
Sexual deviant Frank Cotton buys a puzzle box that's rumored to open a door to otherworldly pleasure. Unfortunately for Frank, what it actually does is tear him apart with hooks in his attic. Frank's brother Larry and his wife Julia move into Frank's house, and while moving some furniture, Larry cuts his hand and the blood falls onto the place Frank was killed, resurrecting him in skinless form. The returned Frank, who had an affair with Julia, convinces her to kill other men who she lures to the attic in order to fully restore Frank. Larry's daughter, Kirsty catches Frank and Julia in the act and steals the puzzle box before collapsing. She awakens in the hospital and solves the box, summoning the Cenobites, who are perpetually looking for carnal experiences. They attempt to take Kirsty back to their realm before Kirsty claims to know where Frank is. The Cenobites agree to spare Kirsty in exchange for Frank, who has now killed Julia's dad and is wearing his skin. Frank accidentally kills Julia while attacking Kirsty and admits to her that it's not really him, it's not Larry, but it is indeed Frank Cotton. The Cenobites emerge from the shadows to rip him to pieces. Kirsty then banishes the Cenobites by reversing the motions of the puzzle box. She tosses the box onto a fire, but a vagrant walks by and retrieves it before turning into a winged creature and flying away. We then see the same merchant that sold the box to Frank selling the box to another unwitting customer.
Yes, and so this is the movie that will make you think twice before ever picking up a Rubik's Cube, ever again. So
Yeah.
So Cenobite. This is Latin for communal religious order describing a monastic life. So these are kind of monks of their cult here. Am I wrong in saying the Cenobites are the headliner of why we watch this movie, Lindsay?
Oh yeah, they're definitely getting you to go into the circus tent, so to speak. You've got Doug Bradley as Pinhead on that VHS cover that scared so many of us. That was the draw to get people in. And I think while that is a very important part of the story, it's not the full story.
Yeah, I do think it's fascinating that Clive Barker didn't feel like the Cenobites were the end-all be-all villain. Like, he was trying to center the franchise around Julia.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was changed in the end, and everyone latched on to Pinhead, which, by the way, Clive Barker hates that name. Russell's talking about religious order. He calls Pinhead the priest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he's called. But yeah, it was supposed to center around Julia. Instead, everyone loves Pinhead.
Mm-hmm.
So serendipity, I guess.
Yeah, and Butterball, Pinhead, the Chatterer, and the female. I guess if you don't name your characters.
Yeah, you're gonna have nicknames, yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah. I feel bad for the female Cenobite. Like, that's her official name because everyone was just really crude about it. Like,
Very crude.
yeah. I don't even know if I could say it. Russell's going to bleep me out. But they had a different name concerning her throat because she has that...
it's not that bad. I mean...
It's the name of a a classic film.
Yeah.
It's also the name of a
yes.
character from the X-Files. You can say it. It's Deep
There you
Throat.
go.
Deep Throat
Yeah,
is
Deep
what
Throat.
it was initially called, and she became known as the female more sensitively, because if there's anything this movie is, it's sensitive.
Oh, yes.
You're right. The earliest drafts, it's interesting. Like, they had a hard time getting this made because Jason was big into full effect here in the 80s. In fact, I thought I was getting in for pretty slashy, bloody. Late 80s, I feel like the quality is starting to shift to the 90s, where this is not the best era for horror. And we've talked about this on What is the Best Era for Horror episode. It's interesting that these are not monstrous creatures. Like, they kind of wanted the silent killer, like Michael Myers, or the funny guy, like Freddy Krueger. Producers felt like there was a formula established by this point, and they wanted more of it. The Cenobites don't do that. They're kind of smart. They're intelligent. They're articulate. They're pretty calm about it. They're just going to tear you apart. And that's different than a lot of the other things that are going on. I think I like that.
I think you need something to stand out. In the era, we had Nightmare on Elm Street. You referenced the Friday the 13th franchise. Yeah, you need something that stands out. And the producers did want the Cenobites to be more funny. They wanted them to be closer to a Freddy Krueger. And thankfully, Clive Barker stood his ground and said, this will set them apart. That I'm going to make them aloof, but also intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Freddy Krueger's intelligent, but he's just a different character, different animal altogether. So yeah, I think it was a very wise decision. They are the star of this show, and my criticism of every Hellraiser movie, whether it's meant to be a Hellraiser movie or not, is I want more of these guys. They do not get enough screen time. They're just so fascinating. You're just drawn in by these odd characters.
So what you're saying is you want a road trip comedy with the four of these guys.
Yes. I want Pinhead saying something like, "You opened the McDonald's, we came."
I would imagine at some point on this road trip that Chatterer would get his tongue stuck on a pole, frozen, like in the wintertime, a la A Christmas Story.
Very good. Very good. Yes. Butterballs Thanksgiving. Yes.
Oh, yeah. There's no, yeah. You won't look at turkeys the same way again after this. But,
Doug Bradley's just screaming, "I will turn this car around."
That's good. That is good.
Don't do it. He just has this strange manner of speaking that I love so much.
And like you were saying, how he wanted to make them, a more intelligent villain. I mean, it does set them apart because you don't really have that in any of the other like main horror icons, I guess. Not that dignified, refined type of intelligence. They're like the Hannibal Lecters.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we hadn't even had Hannibal yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They say they're not an angel or a demon.
Mm-mm.
And later on, they kind of explore that these used to be human beings that were transformed, but they're not really on a side. They're just...
No, they're neutral. They're not involved in anything else but what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. They will tear your soul apart.
Yeah.
They do not care.
Yeah, they're merciless forces of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Later, this shifts, as Chad mentioned. I got to the third movie, and I didn't have it in me to keep going after that one because the character of what they are and how they're used changes, and I think the films suffer for it as well.
Let's just say where this franchise goes, because you got to 3, and I explained this to you a little bit. But the 4th one starts in space, as all good franchises like this do. Leprechaun went to space. Jason X eventually gets there. So we do have that. Then it goes to 18th century France. And after France, we go to 1996. Because of course we do. And then we go back to space.
Back to space
again? There is Hellraiser 4 for you. And if that sounds intriguing, check it out.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know that I need it in space, but... Another thing this movie does, beyond the body horror, that I don't want to be judgmental of anyone's thing here, that turns anybody on, but pain, blood, hurting people, hooks, and murder, these things do not turn me on. Showing the line with seeing people get pleasure from that makes me personally uncomfortable in a horror movie sort of way. So, like, I'm all willing in an exchange of power, black attire, goth look, slightly evil, dark eyeshadow, girl in control, guy in control, like whatever. This is all willing and fun. But open wounds, hooks, being impaled, blood, this is kind of scary for me. So, like, you start hurting people, cutting people up, and blood spewing, I'm out of here. This makes me uncomfortable in a way that's just... But in that, though, there's a juxtaposition of pleasure, fun, sex with brutality, violence, and pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting perspective that this movie brings. And it's not just all gore. So it's not just the gore making you feel uneasy. We have good characters too, which I also like. I like Kirsty, and I definitely do not like Julius. She's such a good bad guy. It's tragic. It's hard to watch her lure these dopes into her attic.
Yeah.
By the way, who walks into this room? It's such a murder room. I mean, she's like, hey, come on to this grody attic with the vile-looking paper on the window and rough floorboards ready to give you splinters just by walking by them. And not to mention the smell of death. I mean, I'm going to say hard pass, lady. I'm not going in that room. Nice try. I'm leaving. I'm going to call it in.
If you're a single, middle-aged, unattractive man and
you've had like 3 martinis, you might do a lot of things that you wouldn't see yourself doing.
Yeah.
But you gotta admit, this is a scary room.
That's true.
It's very scary. It is very scary. For me, yeah, I do like all of the characters as well. I like Kirsty. I really love the character of Julia. She's one of my favorite underrated like horror villains because people kind of forget about her because, everyone like you said, everyone loves Pinhead. But she's one of the worst things in this movie. She's one of the worst people.
Yeah.
And you see this turn from her of her character, and I mean, she'll do anything for Frank, and she's like the ultimate ride or die people, I guess.
Yeah, I saw a take on this, and I still don't know that I've interpreted it that way, but someone had a take that Frank raped Julia in the beginning, and then it turned into an affair. I've watched this. You've watched it 100 times, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I've never taken it that way.
He's definitely very manipulative in the situation. He has the power in that situation, I would say. I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as to say, that it's rape, but it's definitely invasive. He he was taking control of that situation, and the power dynamic is all with him in that relationship. She'll do anything for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that draws her to him.
Mm-hmm.
In a weird way.
Very twisted, very, very twisted way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes her such a good villain. She's mentally broken in that way. She's fixated on him in the way that it haunts her.
Yeah, like when they have those flashbacks when she's looking at the picture, and she looks very different in those flashbacks. She's much softer. She's not so severe looking, like with her haircut or her makeup or her outfits. And I love how they show these subtle changes in the character, because, I mean, she's marrying Larry, who's not the most exciting man, in Julia's eyes. And then all of a sudden Frank comes over, and he's this very domineering, take control, misogynistic, toxic kind of man, and that opens this kind of hidden part of her that she's kept secret. And it kind of plays into, how the box opens doorways. People can open doorways for other people.
Okay.
So this is adapted on a novel, The Hellbound Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And there are changes from this book, and one of them is how the encounter between Frank and Julia goes. They exchanged more sex-based activities with the original intent of that scene, which they had a hard time getting past censors and getting it made in its own right. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
so they exchanged violence for sex, as is so often done in American cinema, because the American culture is just more comfortable with showing violence than sex in our society. So it became Frank pulling out a knife and cutting off Julia's clothes. So whereas that was not necessarily the initial intention.
No.
But there was bondage and spanking, nudity, thrusting, and things like that, which also will enrage the censors. So it became a more violent version, Chad, than what Clive Barker initially wanted. So I don't think the intent was to imply that.
No.
I think he just wanted to get this movie made, and it became.
Yeah. Yeah, I love his mom attended the showing with him. She was crying tears of joy for Clive Barker, seeing his name up there, and he leans over to her and says, "This is the last time you're going to be happy for the next 2 hours."
Yep.
But yeah, he made a very different movie, and if you know anything about Clive Barker, he's kind of working through his own sexuality and putting that in this story, but a lot of things, again, with serendipity, Pinhead was not meant to be the lead Cenobite. It was Butterball. Butterball and Chatterer are very important in the Hellbound Heart. They talk a lot, even the female Cenobite, but because of the makeup, they couldn't talk, they couldn't see, the female Cenobite couldn't move her head, so everything went to Pinhead. And there's Doug Bradley, who was offered the choice of mattress mover or lead Cenobite, which, what a casting.
Right?
And he just falls right into this role, and it just, everything works out. I mean, I can't think of a movie that we've done where so many things went, I don't know if I would say wrong.
Wizard of Oz or Jaws, maybe?
But even in Hellbound Heart, we're getting a new Hellraiser here in 2022, here a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And there's some unnecessary controversy, I guess, because Pinhead is actually described as androgynous. Like, you can't tell if he's...
In the book, he's not... Pinhead's neither male nor female.
Right, and he speaks with a female voice.
Uh-huh.
So
I'm really interested to see this new one, because I mean they've leaked there's a a picture like from the neck up
Yeah.
of Pinhead, and it looks really cool, and I can't wait to see what the rest looks like and how the voice is gonna be, and it'll be very interesting.
For those at home who haven't seen the picture yet, it's Marilyn Manson from The Dope Show.
I'm just happy they put the little jewels at the end of the pens, because that was a little thing. So they're little red jewels. I'm intrigued,
nice.
but they've tricked me at least 8 times in this series. I'm down to be tricked again.
Right?
Yeah, Christy was actually just supposed to be a close friend, but they making it kind of an incestuous, kind of making it more creepy and uncomfortable for you as well. Cause
Yeah.
this movie just wants you to be more comfortable as well. Or sorry,
Right.
more uncomfortable.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think this is another thing that sets this movie apart is with things like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween. The sex in those movies is more exploitative. It's there to get boobs into the movie, things like that, and it's like a morality thing. In this movie, sex is part of the horror of everything.
Yeah.
That was well put.
Yeah, it's part of the horror. It's not meant there to tantalize or anything compared to, the other big horror franchises at the time. It's there to be just as gross as the gore is, or appealing as the gore is.
Yeah, I mean, that makes you feel extra vulnerable, too. Like, if you think about it, you're just very vulnerable. So to be ripped apart like that in a moment of intimacy like that, yeah, it's you're right. That's why there's that juxtaposition of pleasure and horror. And yeah, it's exactly what this movie's playing with. So, and it's not for everybody. I know, like Ebert absolutely
hated this movie. He hated this movie.
He half starred it. I guess Stephen King said, "I've seen the future of horror," and it's Clive Barker. And Ebert cringes at this and saying, "Wish Stephen King had used a pen name when he said that," because he's like, "I like
Richard
good horror
Bachman
movies."
said that.
Ebert said, "I like good horror movies. I enjoy being surprised, but there are no surprises in Hellraiser, only dreary series of scenes that repeat each other. What fun is it to watch the movie mark time until the characters discover the obvious? This movie is without wit, style, reason, and the true horror as the actors are made to portray, and the technicians to realize this bankruptcy of imagination." Maybe Stephen King was thinking of a different Clive Barker. And pretty condemning words when you say bankruptcy of the imagination.
Oh my God.
He has a wonderful way with words. But even Clare Higgins didn't like the movie. She doesn't like horror movies. She walked out of the screening after 10 minutes. She refused to return, which kind of upends all the plans.
I obviously wasn't old enough to be aware of how this would have been received in 87. My guess is these visceral reactions are perhaps just too shocking for people to deal with the content. And maybe as time's gone on, films broadened our horizons or desensitized us to some degree. I see why Stephen King likes this. It's Stephen King like in the moment of like, they introduce you to characters, they move into a house, they make you feel uncomfortable, and they do that slow burn at the beginning. But then it cuts, and once it's on, and it's different. Like it turns into more of a like I'm luring you to your death kind of thing, and then you're dealing with character construction. It's not about the Cenobites. The monsters of the Cenobites don't come into the hospital with Kirsty until 3/4 of the way through the movie.
Yeah, and well, the first real shot of gore is after the whole Frank prequel segment that we get, where we just see chunks of flesh everywhere, and they're putting a face together. You really have no idea what's going on. That there's just chunks of this guy everywhere, and someone is piecing his face back together. That looms over the rest of the film, because you've seen what can happen when these guys show up, and through the whole thing, it just keeps everything so heavy.
Yeah, Frank coming back is a pretty, like when he reanimates, that's a pretty big.
Yes.
There's like these milestones that go along the way. I don't think it's always so obvious as what Ebert's saying. There's a period of time when once like victim number 1 gets brought in to kill, perhaps you can assume there's going to be maybe another few more, and there are 2 more. But I mean, it's not got such a high body count. I find myself just sitting here going like, how did you guys not appreciate some of the better parts of this movie? One thing that I would say is maybe the acting is not necessarily where I want it to be. That can kind of be an across-the-board cut. And that's no knock on Doug Bradley's amazing performance on his work, but We have Andrew Robinson as Larry, Clare Higgins as Julia, and Ashley Laurence as Kirsty, and maybe a little bit of Sean Chapman as Frank. Like, these are your people. These carry most of the lines, most of the dialogue through the movie. As actors, Lindsay, how does this go down for you?
I think Ashley Laurence does a perfectly acceptable job, especially for it being her first feature film. With Frank, it's hard to judge that performance because they dubbed his voice.
Yeah.
You know, they dubbed all the English actors' voices except for Julia. I would be interested to hear their actual voices. Because producers thought that people couldn't relate to the characters because they were English, so they dubbed everybody's voice. Larry, the dad, he's okay. And I don't think it's his performance. I think it's just the character. He's kind of a sap, I would say.
Oh, yeah. His wife is clearly done with him, and he's not really realizing what's going on.
No, he's not.
I find that the portrayal of Larry is a little bit uneven. There's moments where he seems like just like this, maybe a little bit of a doting father, but then there's other moments where he's kind of like rough and like just kind of gruff. And there's moments where like, oh, this guy's just really vanilla. Like, I think that was the point of what they were going for, and why Frank would hold some appeal. But then there's other times where like there's some degree of dysfunction, and his performance with what to do with this character seems all over the place as you watch this movie a second time.
Yeah, I would agree with that it's hard to get a beat on exactly what he was going for.
I think when he becomes Frank, he does a much better job.
Yes, there you see a consistency. That's probably the best part of his performance, is when Frank takes over him.
I'm with you, though. I want them to undub this so bad.
Yeah, me too.
So they said American audiences wouldn't relate to a British person.
Yeah.
Unless the accents are like, "G'day, governor, I'm going to tell you what."
Or they didn't want to have it set in England.
Right, they said it was more marketable in America.
I don't believe that.
No.
The locations are obviously London.
Yeah, obviously, very obviously.
It's just confusing altogether, this weird studio interference.
And they even have lines in the movie that refer to them being in England, because Larry tells Julia, he's trying to convince her to be like, oh no, we're moving back here, it's going to be great. You're back on your home turf.
Right.
Which is England.
You're in Portland.
Right?
It's rough with how they did that, and that steals perhaps more of the acting away. 87's awfully late to be doing this dubbing stuff. I'm apologetic for it in the 50s and 60s. Chad's seen me go to bat for it a little bit. I also find that it's not done as well here as it can be in other times.
No.
It seems more cardboard, and it sucks the life out of the characters. And you're right, Julia suffers less from it as well. And you did mention, though, that it's funny that she didn't like it. She won't watch more than 10 minutes of it because it freaks her out so much. And yet, she cashed that check and came back for number 2.
Yeah. Well, we get Ashley Laurence back with Mayhem from Allstate, Dean Winter himself. So they come back. That's a fun one. But yeah, I saw Clive Barker say he insisted on getting real actors instead of just attractive people for his movie. That's a direct shot on the Friday the 13th franchise, but I'm not sure I would make that statement because I don't feel like it shone through. And part of that is...
No, I don't.
It's absolutely due to the dubbing for some of it, but others, it's like, I get it. Your $1 million budget is shining through. You were able... You weren't able to get the top of the top. Like Jennifer Tilly auditioned for Kirsty. That would have been fun. Or Lance Henriksen, who actually does show up, and he's in Hellworld, which is terrible. But he was offered the role of Frank. These are better actors.
He thought about it, but he turned it down because they didn't want to do a full series of sequels and stuff like that weren't so good. So perhaps a justified concern.
Yes, but then he does Hellraiser Hellworld. So again, bad decision there.
Well, this was like Aliens time for him, so he he was doing much better back then.
I wish we had Lance Henriksen in this. I think that would have been good. And honestly, I want to say Sean Chapman probably comes out of this the better of the 4 that we've just talked about.
And also Lance Henriksen would physically, and the way his style of acting would fit that role pretty freaking well.
Oh, yeah.
So like Sean Chapman has to be handsome enough to like really make Julia like pine over him with him. So he does that, but he also has to seem creepy and menacing. And
Yeah.
he actually does check all the boxes. So of these actors, I think he probably fits the mold the best. But I think where you're talking about, Chad, where Clive wanted actors in the parts were for the Cenobites. They wanted stunt doubles for these guys. And they did get actors for the Chatterer, for Butterball, for the female, and for Pinhead. Perhaps the studios thought that was excessive, but I mean, this is where getting actors, I think, paid off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Even if it's just in movements, there's a difference that you get because, like we've mentioned, Chatterer can't talk because the costume. Butterball can't talk. The female Cenobite can't move. There's a lot of issues with this. Doug Bradley said he was constantly having to tamp down Pinhead's skirts, which is just a hilarious image, to be able to move, and getting someone inexperienced in here to try and get all that. Like Chatterer, for what it does, especially the first scene with Kirsty where runs up and sticks his fingers in Kirsty's mouth, and it's just this intimidating, almost feral dog-like Cenobite. That takes a special person to be able to evoke those emotions without speaking.
And he didn't have eyes either.
No.
Like Doug Jones does in like Pan's Labyrinth, which we covered earlier, like the Pale Man.
Oh my goodness, yes.
You know, like that creature seems like he's Cenobite worthy. I feel like he and Butterball. It's interesting to see what Doug Bradley said that Clive Barker said to him, of like a line from Clive's plays swam to his mind when he was saying, "I'm mourning for my humanity." And at that point, there's no backstory for these characters, but they did agree that they had once been human, but it wasn't necessarily yesterday, last week, 100 years ago. They didn't know. None of that really meant that was there. There was a distance in that, and it was sufficient to have that idea in my brain. Doug said there was a perpetual unconscious grieving for a man that was inside. That was what he carried through with him, that frozen grief that existed in limbo. And man, did Doug ever channel all that in just the right way.
Right. If you're a fan of Hellbound Heart, you're probably upset with Doug Bradley. Like, this is just, it's the complete opposite. It's be androgynous, be feminine, have a feminine voice, and then Doug Bradley just has that booming baritone. But yeah, he does such a marvelous job on here, and his performance overall, I can't believe it was between Furniture Mover or Mattress Mover and this.
In fairness, those mattress movers were bad.
Yeah, those guys went on to do nothing. But yeah, he wanted his face to be seen in his first role, so I guess I get that.
It's interesting, Hellbound Heart, this was the name of the novella that Clive Barker had written, but they couldn't get that made either. So again, the hard part of getting this made, the studios didn't find that was a jazzy enough name. I don't mind the term Hellraiser, but Hellbound Heart is actually intriguing and mysterious and fits what this is really well. I thought it was humorous that he came back and how about sadomasochists from beyond the grave?
Right.
And they didn't like that either, apparently. So.
Yeah, and there was a third suggestion. The cast titled it more from Julia's point of view, "What a Woman Will Do for a Good," we'll go with
shag.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, shag.
Yeah. That is a very good title because that is kind of that should be the tagline of this. What would you do for a Klondike bar definitely escalates here. She goes full out Sweeney Todd here.
Yes.
Well, yeah, 'cause that's the bulk of the story, is the relationship between Frank and Julia and what she will do for him.
I like Bob's Burgers, the TV show. I thought Tina would like the scenes because she has a zombie fetish. Like, she likes zombies a lot. And so I found myself going like, who could be drawn into this? Like, this is a terrifying image. I was like, Tina Belcher. That's who.
Fair enough.
Talk about Clive Barker's character construction here. You said that he was finding himself in writing this. I mean, he was a hustler in the 70s who had no money and kind of drew on this from literal S&M club scenes and having seen some stuff. So it's interesting that his own life experiences, as scary as that sounds, lead to this.
Yeah, he drew influences, like you said, from S&M clubs and the Catholic Church and Catholicism. So that's where we get some of these religious themes. It's almost, he calls Pinhead, the priest. So it's kind of a priesthood or a cult. He was determined to get this movie made, so I think that's why some of the decisions that wind up here get made and why some of the changes get made. But what I find fascinating is he says, I didn't know the difference between a 10 millimeter lens and a 35 millimeter lens. You could have given me a plate of spaghetti and told me it was necessary for filming, and I would have believed you. My favorite story of this is he went to the library to check out books on directing, and there were two, but both of those books were checked out. And he says, well, I'm effed. There, but for a filmmaking debut, I see some criticisms of like, hey, this seems like a high schooler. There are weird cuts, there are weird edits in conversation where it just strangely dries up and then moves on to something else.
I think he did do a really good job since everything was shot except for some of the attic stuff. Everything was shot on location in that house. And I think for a first-time director, he did a pretty good job of navigating those closed spaces, because they do a lot of up and down shots instead of, sweeping side to side things. And it makes for some interesting perspectives.
Yeah, he's got some technique here, like Frank's blood dripping. That's actually a reverse camera shot. And they do have some good camera techniques. I think where he struggled most in the director's chair was certainly when to cut or how to coach. And a lot of this, they ran out of money. He talks about his special effects in the end. He refers to the guy as some Greek guy. There was a Greek guy that finishes up the movie, and it's why it looks different than the end. He finished it up in a weekend, and he's like, judging by the amount of alcohol and time, I'm pretty happy with the final product.
Yeah, those end special effects, the little lightning effects when each Cenobite gets sucked back into the box or whatever. Those used to bother me, but they don't anymore. I just love how quaint and kitschy they are.
That same sound effect every time.
Yes.
Going back to the religious illusions in this, if you mentioned that, Chad, like there's moments like there's a figure of Jesus on the stairs as they come up and kind of in shadow with the light coming in behind him, and like Julia's kind of walking up the stairs, and you see that Jesus falls out of the closet. You mentioned that this was Frank's home before. Frank doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would have this stuff lying around, so these are clearly film making decisions necessarily. Did you make any kind of connections or themes that they were doing with that in terms of what happened in the action? You've seen this far more than I have. I was having a hard time pulling the threads through with what they were trying to do with that.
I'm thinking, it's a possibility that it's because that was their mother's house.
Mother's house, okay.
Yeah, so that they were trying to show that maybe they were brought up in a super religious kind of environment to add more to the themes of religion and stuff like that. I think that was just another layer he was trying in there, that these two men grew up in this house and their mother was extremely religious.
See, now I want to take Larry and make him steer more into that way and Frank be the more rebellious type, so Mr. Straight Arrow. And Larry's character is one of those ones where I'm just like, you said what Clive didn't do? I don't think he told his actors well enough, no, don't do that, do this.
Nope.
That's probably the number one thing. And in fairness, when you're a first-time director, and this is his first time out, I've heard this with other people we've covered on the show, just like, I didn't know I could tell people what to do.
Yeah. That would be a good point. I think I like that change of making Larry a man of faith, attending church, whatever. You could have him be a deacon, whatever, in his church. But it's clearly instilled in Frank's life to some extent, because what's his last line?
Jesus wept.
Yep. And that was actually changed. It was initially F you, and it was changed probably for censorship reasons and to keep the rating down, but it was changed to Jesus wept.
I don't know how much rating down they achieved. This had a hard time. The MPPA gave this X rating for sure.
Right.
And they had to go back and retool.
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny when you read the descriptions. I don't want to get too lewd, but it's like the number of thrusts you use will be counted. Like the rules on this stuff is
you can only have 3 means an R rating, 5 means an X. It's just crazy. Or
yeah.
NC-17.
One of the Johns insisted on being naked.
There's an old Saturday Night Live sketch where a bunch of judges come out and do a official spot check to make sure Chevy Chase and Jane Curtin are making love properly, and it feels like that.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, 2 thrusts. That's right. No more, no less.
No more, no less.
Well, there was one, though, where Julia, the first victim had his head bashed in with a hammer, and they showed more bam, 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 with the hammer and a close-up of the hammer in the head. They did cut down on the violence, too.
And I think there was also a shot more of Frank at the end with his head getting ripped apart.
Yeah.
I think they lingered on that a little longer.
And Russell, Lindsay, have you seen The Loved Ones? Because Russell talking about not liking gore, that was my dealer's choice last year. It did not go well for him.
No.
No, it didn't. It didn't have all this other good character stuff for me in there. So, I mean, I felt Julia's character is a way better villain. So.
Mm-hmm.
You like the Black Widow.
Well, I mean, Julia is there's something human in her. She is.
Oh no, she's a monster, man.
But I'm saying she gives in to her lust. She's consumed by, like you said, what will she do for a good shagging? And consumed by it. And I mean, it's obsession. It's an interesting to unpack this character and to see what's motivating her. Mm-hmm. I want to like Larry a little more than I do. There's some of these moments where he's just like, I'll get the beer myself. I'm like, no, don't do that with Larry. You got to just play it make him nerdy so that you feel sorry for him when he gets...
Yeah, I guess I'll get the beer then, honey. Just very...
Exactly.
A little more happy-go-lucky, I guess.
Sleepless in Seattle that we did together where the sole reason for dumping the guy was he had asthma. You're asking for that character.
No, I'm not going all the way to asthma guy from Sleepless in Seattle, but I am.
Or it was allergies. He had allergies. I'm like, come on, man. I have allergies.
In the same way that Kirsty's likable and I feel invested in her, I want to like Larry a little more than I do. So I'm more concerned that Kirsty lost her dad because I like Kirsty. I'm just like, oh no, that's your dad. I want to actually be sorry for Larry.
Exactly. I didn't feel bad for Larry in that situation. I felt bad for Kirsty.
Right.
Because there's not that
That's not
connection.
what you want.
No, it's not what you want at all.
And then they compound the horror by having her dad hit on her. Come on to her. And that's just, yeah.
Well, it's Frank wearing his skin, so I would have thought it also would have been funny. Frank should have been very specific by okay, I need one more body, but this one really counts. So, this is who I'm going to look like. And then it's my brother. That's kind of creepy, man. Of course, with Frank, he's just into it, probably.
Probably.
Yeah. What's Brad Pitt doing right now?
Exactly. If I got to choose, that's all I'm saying.
Someone call Chris Hemsworth.
Although that part always confused me. I mean, even from the first time I watched it, I'm like, okay, he's sucking these other people dry of their blood or whatever. He said that. He's like, the blood brought me back. And it was regrowing his organs and his bones and his tissues. It wouldn't regrow his skin.
Right.
He had to get someone else's skin. I figured, because the way that they were, the rules of what they were portraying is that if he got enough bodies, he'd be normal again.
Oh, you're right. It's kind of like a Frankenstein approach, where it's just he didn't go in and say I'm going to take your liver.
Yeah. I was just, that part has always bothered me a little bit. Why is he taking his skin?
I agree. Yeah. Yeah, you should be back to normal, Frank, but I guess with the dubbing problems, they're just sure, Andrew.
And I think he just wanted to add that element of how creepy it would be for your uncle wearing your father as skin to hit on you.
Yeah.
While being dubbed.
Yes.
So we kind of got off on a little bit of tangent of some things that weren't working, but I do think Barker preserves his story remarkably well as a director, and his strength in this is storytelling. I think he's uneven with his special effects, and maybe he's not as assertive with what he wants from his actors, but I gotta say, his storytelling is what I do like about it, and that's why I am sitting here going I came out of this the first time going wow, that was a cool movie. And I ran quickly to Hellraiser 2 just to see where this thing goes. And the labyrinth that they depict in the second one, I don't want to go too far into that one, but there's something worth watching in the second one. It's not nearly as good as this one, but it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of lore in Hellraiser, and that's probably the most interesting part. It's just this world that he's created, and there's so much to explore with the Lament configuration and Le Mans box and all of this that he's built. So it's a wonderful world to explore. It's kind of what I said in the beginning of it has so much potential to be tapped into.
Do they actually say where they want to be in America at any point?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, they never established a location.
With as ghetto as the producers were about not being in England, I feel like they should have been like, it's good to be back on my home turf here in the United States.
Back in the Queen's colonies.
I'm going to go to the grocery store and pick up some fireworks.
I kind of like that aspect of it where if you take out that line about being back on your home turf, because I think this whole movie has such a dreamlike quality to the look of it, especially some of the shots in the house, because he uses a lot of natural light, and so things have this dreamlike look to them. I kind of like the aspect of not knowing an exact location. This could be happening anywhere.
Yeah, it follows approach of where they deliberately put weird things in to throw you off on time and place, even though I feel like that's clearly Detroit. It's Detroit. There are too many movies now where I'm not going to Detroit.
At the beginning, I was intrigued, and I wanted to get more of the Asian context that this cube was put in. You're talking about world building. Who's this dude that gives this cube to everybody? I mean,
what's your pleasure, sir?
Right.
Yeah, he's the worst games salesman ever. In fact, I want to know what other terrible games he sells to unsuspecting victims.
That would be an interesting movie.
I imagine him and the salesman from Gremlins are working together. They've just got this weird market of crazy stuff, and you can buy a box of pleasure, or you can buy something that you can't get wet.
They're definitely channeling their Exorcist love pretty heavy in that opening scene.
Oh, yeah.
There's chanting in the background. It's Asia instead of the Middle East, but they're doing all the same tricks. There's chanting. It's hot. Everybody's sweating. There's this mysterious artifact that we have here. There's fly sounds, wings going around. I mean, Clive Barker is definitely drinking the William Friedkin Kool-Aid here from Exorcist pretty hard in the opening scene. And to which I say, you could steal from nobody better than that. So,
and I forget about it every single time. Same with The Exorcist. Same here with Hellraiser. I'm like, oh yeah, we start somewhere else.
I'm not with you. I feel like this is a intriguing world that the cube lives in. Where does the cube come from? This would be a better thing to spend the third movie on than what they did.
I mean, he has a demon retriever, which is pretty darn handy. The thing just flies out to America and then back over to the Middle East for the market.
Functions a lot like the Harry Potter owls, just not nearly as cute.
All right, so demonic Hedwig.
And he eats bugs.
Yeah, that dude is scary, bud.
He is very creepy.
Yeah, in a movie with Cenobites in it, I was still thoroughly creeped out by the hobo in the pet store. Not breaking eye contact with Kirsty while being super grody and eating bugs.
Yeah, just fistfuls of crickets.
I've been hard on some of the acting. This guy was perfect.
All right. Bug-eating hobo, yes.
I also like some of the other nightmare imagery that he puts in, when the Cenobites first visit her at the hospital. We get the weird time-lapse of the flowers opening, and the TV is shorting out, and the IV bag is filling with blood and exploding.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that surreal scene was such a nightmare. That was so good. In fact, Ebert said this movie has no style. I will challenge that. This hospital scene, despite bad acting by the doctors, that is a horrible doctor portrayal, by the way. I mean, that guy was rough. And I give him credit for being progressive and putting a black doctor in it, but not that. Yeah, that guy was rough. But anyway, everything that happens in there is so cool. The tiles turn black, the color inverts, and smoke starts coming through them. And like you said, the IV blood bag where it just explodes because it's reverse going up into her IV. Man, I was pretty uncomfortable through many parts of this movie, but I think I was peak level of uncomfortable watching all this supernatural TV turning on when it shouldn't. And the sound that TV made.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I mean, Poltergeist and The Ring have both trained us to be afraid of TVs when they randomly turn on. But It is a weird criticism. It lacks style. I agree with a lot of his points, but their style was clearly condoms and lube.
Yes.
They used a ton of it. They wanted things to look wet and to sound wet, and so they were just using all this lube, all these condoms all over the place. So it said they made a run to the shop to load up on what looked like a king's ransom of orgy supplies and birthing sequences. It's just, they're making this very, tactile's the wrong word, but sensory film. So there's certainly style that's pumping through this movie the entire time.
I mean, the red flower, time lapsing to like decaying and stuff like that, like the life's being sucked out of the room. It's good. I mean, and honestly, the fantasy part of this kicks in too. Like, I would just call this movie part fantasy movie, not like it's a fantasy we want to experience. But
no,
like, there's another world that she starts to go into.
Yeah,
the split in the wall. Like,
yeah,
she opens a doorway. Yeah,
yeah. This is like Oz or Narnia, only it's way not Oz or Narnia when you go into it. It's bad news. We covered a Neverending Story before. I'll take the Swamp of Sadness over the Cenobites Labyrinth.
Definitely.
Oh no, don't remind me of the Swamp of Sadness. No.
What about Legend? Should I remind you of that one, Chad?
That's a terrible movie.
Oh, I love that movie.
I like that movie.
Surrounded by the worst. Yeah, that would be my Cenobite hell, by the way, is watching Buckaroo Banzai and Legend. Just nonstop. Like,
back to back to back.
Yes.
I will say another thing that sets this horror movie apart from the other franchises, at least in this first film, there's really no humor.
That's true, yeah.
There's no camp, there's no humor. Where the other ones, Freddy is a pretty humorous, darkly humorous character.
Chucky's trying to be funny.
Oh, yeah. I think you find elements of that in all the other big horror franchises, but in this first Hellraiser movie, I can't speak for the entire franchise, but there's no humor. I mean, there's
none.
There's some of the characters like attempting humor within the scene, but it's not humor for us.
Right. No, that's a great point.
The furniture movers are amusingly bad at their acting jobs, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I think you've nailed something I like, Lindsay. Comedy's like my favorite genre, but you're right. I don't like my horror to be particularly funny.
Yeah.
Now that you think about it, I'm pretty serious about my horror, and you might have stumbled on one of the things I like about that. Everything's handled with great seriousness in this movie.
Yeah, it's very, very serious. Even though, there's leather-clad demons coming out of the walls, it's very, very serious.
Yeah, with exposed nipples, you don't really feel like laughing at Pinhead once.
No.
It's like he's got that belly window and the windows for his nipples. What a strange costume.
We talked about Legend a second ago, actually. This movie is right there with Legend for the best wardrobe and makeup of any movie we've covered at this point, I think. For a cheap movie, they do not look cheap.
No, not at all.
The makeup, the character design on these, it's just amazing.
Right? 6 hours for Doug Bradley to become Pinhead. And I think it's really fun as the series goes on. He had it done so much that he learned to do it himself. He would do his own makeup. And in later movies, he's actually credited as one of the special effects and makeup artists. So he gets so used to it.
So after securing funding for the motion picture adaptation, Clive Barker took his producer, Christopher Figg, and they assembled a team. This is the dream team here. They got Bob Keane and Jeffrey Portas. They were on their first run here at Image Animation. And then they also nailed it again with Jane Wildgoose as the costume designer. These three come up with the look of the Cenobites. I think two of us even said just the sheer cover of this captivated you before you ever even saw it. Haunted you for years, decades.
Yeah.
And before you ever saw it. That's pretty amazing. I want to really take a moment just to say, like, Pinhead looks like he has little flesh grids cut out of every little piece of his face. Very precise array of nails in him. It's staggeringly scary, and to think that they sat there not only drawing that, but like molding it into his face over 6 hours, just the dedication and the attention to detail. And it follows through with what they're wearing too.
Oh yeah, and it's so different than anything that had ever been seen before. Because, I mean, they took aspects from so many different cultures, like tribal piercings and scarification. They took so much inspiration from different cultures in constructing the looks, and they all just had such attention to detail that everything just came out looking like they spent a lot more money than they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob Keane was pretty young at this point. He's only in his mid-20s, but he had amassed an impressive list of credits. So he'd worked on the Star Wars trilogy. He worked with Jim Henson on multiple films. He had done a handful of projects with Nick Millay. Millay got sick, and Keane was tasked with designing all the makeup and special effects for Highlander. What an amazing run in your young career to lead you to this point. So, of course, he's probably one of the most competent people on this whole film production. And Barker even said, like, he looks back at filming this fondly. Everybody on the set was remarkably delicate and kind to him, and they were very forgiving. There was a fondness for him that they had of this. And a movie that didn't necessarily get their first cut of everybody, man, just by virtue of his age, maybe, but Bob Keane, just amazing work. In his 20s. That blew my mind.
Yeah, can you imagine the direction? It's like we want to make this pseudo S&M costumes with a hole in the throat based off of this African ritual, or we want someone with just a giant set of teeth and no eyes, or a fat guy with sunglasses. Make that cool, make that intimidating. It's like, all right, off we go.
The costume designer Jane Wildgoose was asked to just make 4 to 5 super butchers. This is what she does with them. They were only given a couple of criteria. They said they have to have areas of revealed flesh where torture was included, something associated with butchery, again, like cutting up and carving people, and it had to have repulsive glamour.
I love that descriptor, repulsive glamour. It fits them very, very well. That's like the perfect way to describe it.
And he said 1 or 2 of them should have hangers on them, like to be like hanging. That's all that she was given. And then she gave this gold. We haven't talked as much about them, but Chatterer is every bit as scary as Pinhead to me. Pinhead's got the great actor and he gets the lines, but Chatterer is really scary too.
Yeah, Chatterer is my favorite Cenobite too.
Yeah, they bring back, I don't know what happens to Chatterer 2, but Chatterer 3 is brought back in the series. There's probably some lore reason why Chatterer 2, I don't know. But that's how popular it was. You don't get returning Cenobites, but you get Chatterer again.
It's very different from the other ones. I mean, it's more closer to Butterball with, how grotesque that, the facial features are all distorted. That it has no eyes and just these chattering teeth and says nothing. It's such an odd design, I think, and the physicality that the actor brought to it really set it apart.
Absolutely. And the guy with Butterball was just somebody in Clive Barker's theater group. He's like, hey, you want to come do this? Like, how many hours of makeup for him? I know even the female Cenobite took 3 hours to do all that makeup. They're all an absolute labor. And they're all truly terrifying in their own way. I think it's cool that they don't, like you said, they each take different styles too. Like this over-bloated guy whose stomach is hanging out so he can like touch his guts and stuff like that. Like there's so much thought put into this character of somebody who like is the total glutton. At the same time, Chatterer has this pulled face that seems warped in a whole nother way that's not like the other two. And then the female is like one big move by cutting her neck open. It's really interesting how varied they are and how they're all equally terrifying together.
The female Cenobite, even though she can't really move at all, she does some really cool thing. Like there's the one shot where she's like sticking her finger into her throat wound.
Yeah.
It's so disturbing.
It is. And I gotta say, in a movie with many terrifying things, one of the most terrifying things is Julia's attire and her hair. The Bride of Frankenstein hair that looks like it is out of a form mold. It is super stiff. It looks like you could hit it with a baseball, would like be hit out of another lawn, and then just like it would stick. Like just right in there. And she wouldn't notice it. It's that stiff. The gigantic star earrings that she has from the 80s are so 80s tacular. And the jumbo glasses and the shoulder pads that look like they're from a football linebacker. And yes, she goes to the bar and picks up and beds 3 men and very quickly, nevertheless. So she talks a good game because that is quite a getup.
Yeah, it's just showing that change in her character from when she first met Frank. Everything about her is very severe. From the cut of her clothes to her hair to her makeup to her lipstick. It's just very, very severe and pointy.
Yeah.
It's very pointy.
And we talked about how some of the special effects weren't good, but some of them were good. Lindsay, what are some of the special effects that you did like?
The rebirth of Frank
Oh, yes.
is I think the best special effect in the film. Just because they really took their time with it piece by piece. Because before, they didn't shoot that sequence. The first rough cut of the film, they showed, the studio, and they're like, here's a little more money. And they took that money and went and shot that sequence. And I'm glad they did, because it's such a very, very strong sequence. Like the stop motion stuff and the reverse shots they did to get some of the things that were going on, like his heart reforming and stuff like that. Just really, really crazy stuff. That final image of it, of just this half animated corpse with just skeletal bits on it screaming in front of these backlit windows. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that that's so early on, because that sets the bar way, way too high.
It does.
For the rest of the movie. It's like, this is awesome. And then the Greek guy lets us down in the end with his weekend.
Oh, that is disappointing. But Julia's murdering is another like mini crescendo.
Oh,
and then there's the, oh my gosh, Frank's consumed this guy's body. While not as terrifying visually, that's a shocking moment. And like I mentioned, when the walls split apart in the hospital, she's just like defenseless in this locked room, like windowless room, and nothing but a hospital.
All the bloody gore is really, really good. Like when Julia murders people, and then when Frank is wearing Larry's skin, when she rips at his face and you just get these like bloody chunks hanging down. All of the like the skin tearing and ripping is really, really grody.
Yeah, I think Frank erupting at the end from the hooks pulling him apart, stylized, but it was stylized in a good way. All of these scenes shot in this room are done with darkness, so you don't just see the puppets or the makeup. It's obscured enough. And Frank, the actor playing Frank in that suit, moves very quickly, which is part of what's so shocking. That low camera angle of him like crawling out of the shadows at the door when she closes the door behind her. Whew, that got me. Definitely makes you want to say, don't just close the door, run out of the house, lady.
Right.
It's very unsettling.
You mentioned the reverse photography. That is amazing. So they constructed models of body parts of waxes of different melting points and different colors. And they heated up this model and they filmed it in reverse so that all of the waxes melted off and did go into a pool. And they just took the film and reversed that. They took the same effect with like the blood from Larry's hitting the floor, being consumed into the floor. They had like little nail holes that they could like seep the blood up. And it was just so cool to see how this is the 80s. They don't have computers. They did all of this without computers. And it all looks really good.
All in camera effects, except for the end.
Actually, so I'm excited to have this remade because I believe the acting can be better. And I believe some of the special effects at the end where it's just like, you ran out of money at the end. That's so frustrating. And I think you can set up better lure to the world that you were saying. For sure, all three of those things excite me. But the thing that scares me about it, though, is the wardrobe and the makeup. It's not going to look this good again because no matter how good the CGI is, this was just so good.
Oh, yeah. You use puppets and practical effects. I will clarify, it's not necessarily being remade. Clive Barker himself has said, hey, you can't remake this movie. It's just almost like a soft reboot of it. They're not attempting to touch this story itself.
Oh, we're not getting... Oh, I'm disappointed. So we're not getting Frank and Julia and Larry again.
No.
Oh, my heart sank a little bit.
Oh, I'm with Clive Barker on this one. Like, yeah, I want better things for it, but I don't want them to go back and try this again. I want them to build a time machine and just get more money and do it better. I don't want to see someone else try and screw it up.
Well, he did get more money because they saw some of the early cuts of it and they realized that some good stuff was being done here. All that stuff that we were talking about, like being shot in reverse and animatronics, most of the money was being dumped into that Frank rebirth scene. So the producers did see it. They did get $1 million is more money than it had. being dumped into it. Those shots are done on a soundstage, so they had more control and to be able to do some of those amazing things. So they spin it wisely. I just wish they had also gone back and shown them the results of that so that they could have some money to finish the movie off, because they, like I said, they made $14+ million. So I mean, it's just give me another 1 million. Let me finish this thing off right.
It's insane that we're now talking about a $2 million, like a $1 million difference in the movie. And knowing what we know now, it's spawned 10 movies of varying quality. Right. Most of them were direct to video, but nevertheless, like, this is a huge franchise. Merchandising alone probably have set Clive Barker for life. Like, just $1 million. Come on.
He doesn't really direct much after this.
He did, Nightbreed and Lord of Illusions?
That's it.
Those the other two? Yeah.
Yep, that's it. And he writes those also. He's really a writer, and then later on he just kind of starts producing. It's not like this was his calling, it looks like to me, but he sure had a good piece of work, and I'm glad he breathed his own story to life. It makes me wish that he could... Would you want a George Lucas or Steven Spielberg, like, I'm going to touch this again. I'm going to go back and fix some things, Lindsay?
No, I don't think so. Because like I said, I find the special effects at the end, I find them charming now, you know, and it, just the look of it and the some of the acting that's not so great, it just adds to the appeal for me because I've seen it so many times. When I watch this, I don't see the flaws anymore. It's just, I love this movie and I love it flaws and all. So I wouldn't want anything changed.
I'm afraid when you say George Lucas tampering, but I wouldn't mind if they went in and fixed up the hand-drawn end animation and fixed it up so it doesn't make the same cheesy 80s lightning sound whenever the box is closed. You could hear that sound effect and instantly know the movie was made in the 80s. It's like, okay, can we get something unique? Maybe do a different sound each time. Clean up the lightning and the explosions. I would be for that, yeah.
I think you could do some retouching, like you said. I don't need the lightning. Even like when the boxes in the beginning with the blue lightning, that was the first sign of little cheapness in the beginning. I was like, ooh, just get a little bit of dry ice and pop it in that little box and let it steam. We don't need to go too high tech here with this. 80s lightning was a fascination. We saw it in Highlander, and we saw it in some of these other things, and it's just like, it's almost like they came to the directors like, you know, we can make lightning now. What? Let's do it. Yeah.
Did you see what they did in Return of the Jedi? That through the entire decade.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Back to the Future can get away with this, and somehow Spielberg doesn't seem cheesy or whatever, but for the rest of the 80s, lightning is a problematic effect where it's too cool for them to say no to. And it's in full effect at the end of this movie. That and slow motion. Slow motion plus lightning. Ooh.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. We get some slow motion in Kirsty's dream sequence.
Gotta have it.
That always freaked me out as a kid because of the kid crying in it. It's just such a weird sound to put. It's such a disturbing sound to put over that imagery. That scene always affected me as a kid.
Right from the get-go, the music also grabbed me too. And I was surprised to see that in this case, Barker had his initial soundtrack stripped out. He had the industrial band Coil do all the music from this. It was a group that he had heard whose records just made his bowels churn, which if that's an endorsement for your music, I don't know what it is. But I mean, he then had that stripped away from him. They didn't want to pay for that. I got to say, they just took like a house band to do the music, and that's not that bad.
It's not. It's a nice horror thriller type of score. It works very well, especially those chimes towards the end when the Cenobites are coming. It's almost like the a chime on a clock. It's very, very effective.
It's no Tubular Bells from The Exorcist, but it's still good.
This is back-to-back movies, Russell, where I'm surprised at your tolerance of a synthesizer, because that's pretty heavily used.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's creepy, man. It sets the mood. Like, I didn't say I want to sit there and listen to it. It sets the mood.
It's the same guy that did A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Invaders from Mars. So it's a very gothic score. It's Christopher Young. And if you've seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2, it's a very, very different type of Freddy flick.
Oh, yeah.
But it definitely fits kind of the same themes here of the S&M and exploring sexuality. So he has a niche.
There is a 9-track compilation of this out there. The Unnatural History 2, Smiling in the Face of Perseverity, and on another album of the unreleased themes of Hellraiser. I don't know that I want to replace that in my quote-unquote George Lucas retouch. I'll keep my cheap music, I think. I just want the voices undubbed.
Yeah.
Lindsay, are you ready to hand out some awards?
Sure.
MVP of Hellraiser.
It's Clare Higgins as Julia. She does such a great job, and I love how that character is written, and I love how she performs it. She's so cold and just unmoved, like she shows no emotion on her face. And the only time you get like a genuine smile from her is when she starts doing these killings for Frank.
Oh, I know.
She's loving herself in those moments. I think she's such an underrated horror character. She's kind of like cult horror character, and I just love it.
She does have some reservations about killing Larry. She's like, no, let's not kill him. Like, I'm totally like leaving him for you, but I don't want to kill him.
She gets over that pretty quickly.
Right.
But she was reluctant.
She did protest a little bit. So, I mean, there's some semblance of a human being in there.
MVP, Chad.
Doug Bradley as Pinhead. I think if you're going strictly from source material, you're probably annoyed by this performance, but he's just an icon at this point. The deep voice, the stature, he's just so intimidating. And they replaced him in Hellraiser 9 with this, like, Spirit Halloween alternative guy, Doug Bradley's.
Wasn't it like a big dude?
Yeah.
I don't think Doug wanted to do it anymore.
He didn't want to do that script, which is a lot, saying he did Hellraiser Hellbound. But, yeah, he refused. And so I'm a guy that just has naturally bigger cheeks. They kind of casted someone like that in the role. So it's a guy that kind of looks like he's storing nuts for the winter as Pinhead. It's a bad look. Like, find someone with a more gaunt face like Doug Bradley.
Yeah, you need cheekbones.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Nice jawline, severe jawline.
Yes.
Well, he does it for 18 more years after this, so it's a great pick. Tipped my hand on this one, and Bob Keane, Jeffrey Portas, and Jane Wildgoose. The trio of them give the look and feel of Hellraiser that I believe is what drew us in and what keeps us coming back.
Absolutely, yeah.
I agree.
Best supporting actor.
I put down Ashley Laurence as Kirsty. I think she does a good job, especially for her first role. And she's a very strong female character. She doesn't really rely on any of the men in the movie to save her. I especially love the end where she's fighting the engineer for the box. They're kind of like wrestling for it. And she finally gets it away, and then her stupid boyfriend, like, tries to grab the box, and she, like, slaps his hand and pushes him away.
He is a pretty doofy boyfriend.
She's like, I have this, you know?
Yeah.
So I like her character.
Yeah, I thought for sure he was going to bite the dust.
Oh, yeah.
He just reeked of, like, you're not making it through this movie.
Right.
He didn't even need to show up at the end, you know?
No, you're right.
I think I might be less hard on him had he not shown up at the end in a bad windbreaker. Being
Right?
so clueless on everything. Like, what is happening? It's like your adrenaline's running. You don't care. Best supporting actor, Chad.
I went with Oliver Smith. He plays the monster version of Frank. I thought he was threatening, but he's still very charming. Russell, you talked about the movements. That's tough to do in that suit, so I liked Oliver Smith.
Yeah, great choice. And I went Doug Bradley here because I do think, despite him being on the cover of the movie, I think he is a supporting player, and he does an amazing job here. So, hidden gem, Lindsay.
I put the first of Julia's victims, because that guy is just so, like, skeevy.
Yeah.
He is.
You know, the way he takes his clothes off, and then he's like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom now, and he just very, very convincingly plays a kind of guy that would pick up a woman at lunchtime and go to her attic to have sex.
There's a type.
Right?
Creepy attic, too. Yeah.
Very creepy.
They had to reshoot that scene. The actor insisted on being naked, and they shot it naked, and then they made him put clothes on.
It doesn't surprise me.
Hidden gem, Chad.
We've talked about it before, but Nicholas Vance as the Chatterer, I love that Cenobite so very, very much. And there's a reason why they brought it back. So all of the Chatterer's performance.
And I'm going to go with Frank Baker. He's the derelict, or he's listed as the derelict, but he's the bug-eating creepy hobo.
Nice.
Yeah.
Recast, Lindsay.
I decided to go a little funny. I said you should recast Larry, the guy who played Larry, with Bob Saget.
Oh.
Especially at that time. It might have been a few years later when Full House started up.
Yeah.
But it's just that Danny Tanner kind of attitude.
Well, I said I wanted to like him more.
Right.
You steered into it. You steered all the way into it. I like it.
I went after Andrew Robinson as well. I recasted him with Alec Baldwin because when I think of the character, I think of Alec Baldwin's character from Beetlejuice. Kind of this same
Oh,
dorky-
yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, at this point in time, he's too much of a hunk to be...
You could nerd him up a little.
Is he
I
nerdy
felt like
enough
he
for
was
this?
a nerd in Beetlejuice, but he's good.
Okay. I didn't think it worked then either. I felt like it was just like, it's a handsome man who put
all
a
right,
pair
so
of glasses
he's your
on.
Clark
I'm
Kent.
not fooled.
Like, you're not fooling me, Superman.
You are no Rick Moranis, Alec Baldwin.
All right.
Stop taking nerds roles. They belong to nerds.
Poor Larry.
I also went after Larry. Yeah. I went a more serious route where I wanted a good actor in the role, and I got Sam Shepard to do the part. And I think that he would have been good for the part. And I don't ever do this, but I broke my own rule. I went ahead and recasted Julia too. What about Isabella Rossellini for
I can't
Julia?
do that. I like Clare Higgins.
Me too. I thought she did a great job.
Oh man, I felt like she would have taken creepy up to another couple notches.
I get
I just love Claire.
Nope, people aren't
Claire
biting on
Higgins'
that one.
performance because she's just a stone cold. She has that look about her, and she pulls that off so well.
Best shot.
The Frank Rebirth backlit scream is my favorite shot in the whole movie. It's just so effective and creepy and gross looking, and that guttural scream that comes out of him.
Yeah. I'm going to make it 2 for 2 to add another adjective. I think I'm going to add insane. It is an insane shot and an insane scene. But yeah, I had creepy, incredibly effective. Lindsay nailed all of the description.
My 3 favorite shots are all from this scene. So, I mean, I'm with you guys. I'm just going to give a shout out to Frank, like being on his hands and knees, rapidly moving towards the door with that low perspective as a runner up. It's all part of the same scene. So, best scene, Lindsay.
The arc of Julia becoming this serial killer, because on top of this like fantastical spiritual horror that we have going on, this movie's a serial killer movie with her activities. So just that first initial victim, and then by the time she's to the third one, she's just nonchalantly wiping the blood off the hammer.
Yeah.
You know, and so I just love that whole arc of her becoming this serial killer.
Absolutely. And she is the real monster in this one. Like to take a George Romero type line, the people were the real monsters all along. Yeah, Chad, how about you? Best scene?
The hospital scene with the arrival of the Cenobites, the blue lightning, the TV switching off, Chatterer going straight after Christie's mouth with his fingers, the IV bag, everything that we've talked about, the synth score in the background. It's just this wonderful culmination of just terror.
You guys, so I often, knowing that I usually go last with this, I usually
Nice.
back up just in case, and you took them both. So, correct. Those are the correct answers in both cases. I'm not prepared with the third one. So, best wardrobe or makeup moment, of which there are so many good ones. Lindsay.
There are so many good ones. I mean, we've touched on both of. I have 2 of them. One is lesser than the other, but we've touched on both of them. Julia's wardrobe, I love, and I already talked about why, the severeness of it. And the other one is again Frank's rebirth. That's where they put a lot of money and time into that whole effect, and it really, really paid off.
Yep. Great choices. Chad, best wardrobe.
I wanted to credit the company. It's called Russell FX. That's Bob Keane and team. But if I have to do something specific, you know what? The little belly window in Pinhead's costume, for whatever reason, that is just so off-putting and unsettling. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a slight bulge or whatever it is, belly. I think that's brilliant.
And I'm just going to go for Pinhead's head. I'll be honest with you. It captivated so many people, and it really drew me to the movie. It scared me before I ever saw the movie. That's amazing to me. And then it delivered. It didn't seem any like, I can't believe I was afraid of that. It's like, no, he's scary. So I got to go with Pinhead. He's the iconic character. I think he's the reason why we have 10 of these.
Yes.
Lindsay, change one thing.
The dubbing of the voices. I think that harms a few performances. And anytime there's dubbing in a movie, it just kind of lowers the quality. It just dings the movie a little bit when there's bad dubbing. So that would be the one thing that I would change about this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great choice. We probably picked it on this one more than we usually do on a normal episode. These are valid criticisms. So, I mean, Chad, how about you? Change one thing, and only one thing.
I'd like to spend more movie time with the Cenobites. I think it's true here and it's true throughout the franchise. And even with your joke, I would absolutely watch Butterball and Chatterer go to White Castle. Get whatever it takes. It's just painful okay, Frank's back, 5 minutes, he's gone. And then 5 more minutes, the Cenobites are gone. I mean, we're building to this. Give me the crescendo I deserve.
I also think that when pizza places started making cinnamon bites, I'm very disappointed that nobody decided to use the Cenobites to sell cinnamon bites. Very lost opportunity.
Sell it from a pleasure angle.
Yes, absolutely.
Cinnabon needs to get on that now.
Buy these Cenobites or I will tear your soul apart.
Not enough threatening angles taken in the marketing industry. Think about that.
There you go.
No.
Fear's an emotion you can exploit. So my change one thing is going to be the acting. I kind of came after the 4 of them earlier. I mean, it's all 4 of the main roles, and to me, it's the number one thing. If you got some better actors in here, they're going to make some character decisions with how Larry is portrayed and how I think Julia can go to another level, which is why I threw Isabella Rossellini in there. This is a great character. It's well written, and Clare Higgins is a good villain. But I think I think this thing can elevate to all-time great horror movie status with better acting.
So I think, and I don't know if this was something directed to them by Clive Barker, but when you look at the flashback scene and the other scenes where the characters are interacting, it's almost melodramatic at times, and that kind of seems to be the theme throughout that. It's just it's elevated drama, the style of acting some of the actors are doing.
Yeah, it feels soap opera-esque.
Yes, definitely.
It does, exactly. I keep going back to it again, but when we did The Exorcist, it's the acting top to bottom is so good, and if it's not good, it could come off as goofy. And this is soap opera acting. How good could it be with really good actors?
So you're saying what should have happened is Clive Barker firing guns behind his actors' ears to motivate them?
It got some results. I don't know if it's a good way to treat people, but I gotta say it was mighty effective. The methods don't seem to work out, but the product was good, so...
It was the 70s.
Yeah.
It was a different time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, best quote of the movie, Lindsay.
I love the line, angels to some, demons to others. Just shows how much they don't care, how they have no stake in it. You're not going to sway them one way or another. They're going to do what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Chad, best quote.
The box. You opened it. We came. Just so simplistic, but
it's just so matter of fact.
It's a terrible policy because she's just I don't want this. It's a puzzle. I don't want to participate in any of this. And I feel like they should kind of be yeah, she's no fun to play with. This isn't what,
Yeah, there should be like one of those mattress tag things on the box of like, please do not open this unless you want to experience carnal pleasures unknown to any man. Because yeah, that would totally be my wife. If she loves puzzles, she'd find this thing, she'd solve it, and she'd be tormented for eternity by Cenobites. That's a bit unfair.
Pulled apart by fish hooks on chains. No, thank you.
Right? Yeah, just for being curious.
I know. My best quote, I kind of didn't take it the right way when you said you just forget the Asian parts there and you don't even like it, because in the Asian market, when he goes, "What's your pleasure?" Followed up by another great one of, "Take it, it's yours." It always was.
Mm.
Man, that guy's like has 3 lines in the movie. They're all my favorite lines, and we don't even see his face. I want to spend more time in China with this dude. Lindsay, do you want to remind people at home one more time where we can hear you and your efforts?
Yeah, you can find me at my YouTube channel. It's my name, Lindsay Washburn. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I always post on there things that I've got going on. And you can also catch me on the Bad Movie Night podcast. We go live every Monday. That episode is posted every Thursday.
Have you done Hellraiser 3 yet? Because you should.
No, we have not. We're slowly but surely working our way through the Witchcraft series.
Oh, no.
Which has been a journey. I think we just finished 9, and number 10 is on the list. So it's been a lot.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, we've come full circle here. And on a scale of 5 stars with half-star intervals, Lindsay, what would you give Hellraiser?
I really love this movie, but I do recognize that it has some issues and some faults. Some not its own fault, just because of the budget and things like that. But I would give it 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay, and Chad, how about you? You're usually a hard grader here. On a 5-star scale, what's Hellraiser going to be?
I hate my role in this because everyone's so excited. I give this the most loving 2.5 stars I can.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I gave it years ago, and I think it stays. The Cenobites, Pinhead, are amazing, but I just think it struggles to hold that same intrigue after Frank is resurrected. And we've talked about it ad nauseum. The acting and the dubbing just crushes what could be in this movie, so it hurts. It hurts me. I want these things fixed so it could be up there in the 4.5, 5-star range for me.
Wow, I'm gonna follow suit with Lindsay here. It's odd for me to find a movie that has this much wrong with it, but I'm gonna go 4 stars because the things that are right are so exceptionally right. Like the wardrobe, the makeup, the looks, the character design, and also the story that's the backbone through it, as well as many of the special effects executions through this. So it's hard to overcome bad acting. And it's hard to overcome some budgetary constraints, but this movie is actually a very good instance of one of the best cases of overcoming pretty much rough acting. And it does it really well. And that just goes to show you, there's all these other facets that go into making a movie. And so often we're driven by only the story or maybe the story and the actor. And this is a really good case of saying, when they hand out Oscars for all these other things, this is why you can make a movie off of the environment and the experience they give you, because it evokes that emotion that a horror movie is supposed to. And it does it very effectively. I'm made incredibly uneasy and I'm thoroughly scared, and I return to it and it still gets me. So it's got high rewatch value too. So I would like to see it remade because I think lots of money and good actors would, like you said, I think this could go really high for me. Okay, Chad, you ready to help me pick a movie for next time?
Absolutely. I've got the list right here, Russell. So option number 1 is Hatchet from 2006. We're going to have a slasher theme out of these choices. So when a group of tourists in a New Orleans haunted swamp tour find themselves stranded in the wilderness, their evening of fun and spooks turns into a horrific nightmare. Option 2, The Burning from 1981. A former summer camp caretaker, horribly burned from a prank gone wrong, lurks around an upstate New York summer camp bent on killing the teenagers responsible for his disfigurement. Or option number 3, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon from 2006. The next great psycho horror slasher has given a documentary crew exclusive access to his life as he plans his reign of terror over the sleepy town of Glen Echo.
with this blockbuster of well-known, well-loved movies, I'm going to go with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
You won't regret it, sir. Excellent slasher.
Well, what we won't regret is having Lindsay back on the show someday. So thank you, Lindsay. You've been great to have on. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's fun to talk about this movie because I really, really enjoy it. And it was nice to really do a deep dive into some of the characters and the meaning behind them. So yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us, so we want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, even YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook, follow us at Twitter at @movie_retro. And providing and producing this podcast is fun, but not free, so we invite you to support our show at Patreon at www.patreon.com/Retro Movie Roundtable. All contributions are much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. So as always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Chad?
He just wants his machete back.